It started with a joke. A single sentence that changed everything. One line, delivered in front of millions, that made the world stop laughing. No one saw it coming. Not the producers, not the audience, not even Jimmy Kimmel himself. But that night, live on air, the man who built his career on making others uncomfortable, was about to be made uncomfortable himself. The punchline that was supposed to draw laughter instead sparked outrage. And by morning, it would ignite one of the most explosive confrontations ever seen on late-night television. The lights of the studio burned hot, even hotter than usual. Jimmy Kimmel sat behind his desk, that half-smirk America had come to know so well frozen on his face. It was supposed to be another ordinary night. Another round of laughs, applause, and the kind of carefully measured controversy late-night television thrives on. But not tonight. Tonight, something in the air felt heavier. The audience didn't know it yet, but they were about to witness a moment that would ripple far beyond those studio walls. The cameras rolled, the applause sign flickered, and the band faded down. Kimmel launched into his rhythm, swinging jokes, poking fun at politicians, celebrities, anyone unlucky enough to trend that day. The crowd laughed right on cue. But then he reached the line, the one that would set off everything. He said it casually, with that trademark grin, a joke that played on a recent tragedy, one people were still grieving. It was meant as satire, or so he'd claim later, but the laughter that followed was strained, nervous. Somewhere backstage, producers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The clip hit the internet within minutes. By morning, outrage was everywhere. On social media, radio, and podcasts. People weren't debating whether it was funny. They were asking whether Kimmel had finally crossed a line he couldn't joke his way back over. Among the loudest critics stood Ben Shapiro, conservative commentator, sharp-tongued debater, and a man who'd made a career dissecting moments. Like this with surgical precision. So, when Kimmel's team invited Shapiro onto the show for what was supposed to be a civil conversation, everyone knew it. Wouldn't stay civil for long. It was the kind of booking networks dream about: tension, morality, ego, and millions of viewers waiting to see who'd blink first. The night of the show, Kimmel tried to keep his usual energy. The crowd cheered as he walked on stage, but even he could feel it. The applause wasn't warm. It was curious. He introduced Ben Shapiro with that half-friendly, half-daring smirk. Shapiro walked out calm and composed, carrying that look that said he'd come prepared for a fight, not a comedy bit. They shook hands, sat down, and for the first few minutes, it all went smoothly. Kimmel tried to ease into it with jokes, but Shapiro wasn't biting. He was direct, clipped, deliberate. "I get it, Jimmy," Shapiro said early on. "Comedy's supposed to push boundaries. But there's a difference between pushing boundaries and trampling on pain." The audience went quiet. Kimmel leaned forward, still smiling, but the sparkle in his eyes dimmed. "Come on, Ben," he said. "You're telling me you've never made a joke that didn't land the right way?" "I'm saying timing matters," Shapiro replied. "And context matters. You don't joke about grief when the wound's still open." The crowd hesitated, unsure whether to clap or stay silent. Even through the camera lens, the tension was thick enough to taste. Kimmel's voice rose just a little, a sign he was trying to steer the ship before it capsized. "Look, man, people know what my show's about. They know I don't mean harm. It's just jokes." Shapiro didn't smile. "If someone joked about your loved one's death, would you still call it just jokes?" The question hung there like smoke. Kimmel blinked. The laughter that usually saved him never came. Even the studio crew froze, waiting for a cue that never arrived. For a full second, the only sound was the faint hum of the lights. Then Kimmel forced a laugh. "Ben, you're good at this. You twist everything into a moral lesson." "Maybe," Shapiro said quietly. "Or maybe you're just not used to being held to your own standard." It wasn't shouted, but it hit harder than any punchline. The crowd reacted, a mix of gasps, nervous chuckles, a few scattered claps. Somewhere in the control room, a producer mouthed, "Cut to commercial!" But Kimmel waved them off. He wanted to keep going, maybe out of pride, maybe because he thought he could win it back. "So what?" Kimmel said. "You think comedians should stop taking risks? You want everything sanitized?" "I think," Shapiro replied, eyes locked on him, "comedy has power. And when you use it to mock tragedy, it stops being brave. It becomes cheap." Kimmel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His hands fidgeted with the pen on his desk. He looked toward the audience, searching for backup. Instead, he saw uncertainty. Some nodded with Shapiro. Others stared at the floor. The tension was electric now. Not just a disagreement, but two worldviews colliding under the brightest lights in entertainment. Kimmel forced another laugh. "You're really gonna moralize comedy on my show?" "I'm not moralizing," Shapiro said evenly. "I'm reminding you there's a line, and you crossed it." The murmurs swelled. The show had slipped out of Kimmel's control, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one commanding the laughter. He was the subject of the silence. Backstage, the crew was divided. Some thought it was a disaster. Others whispered it might be the best television moment of the year. Conflict sells. And this was pure, unfiltered conflict. Kimmel finally managed to cut to commercial, plastering on a smile as the band played. But when the cameras went off, he didn't move. He just sat there, staring at his desk, jaw tight. Shapiro stood, adjusted his jacket, and extended his hand again. "Nothing personal," Shapiro said calmly. "Just conversation." Kimmel didn't shake it right away. When he finally did, it was brief, polite, cold. The kind of handshake that says more than words ever could. As the audience filed out, snippets of conversation floated through the air. Some thought Kimmel had been ambushed. Others thought he'd been exposed. But everyone agreed on one thing. They'd never seen him that quiet before. And as clips of the confrontation flooded social media within the hour, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a late-night spat. It was the beginning of something much bigger. By morning, hashtags trended across every platform. News outlets dissected every second of the exchange. And while Kimmel's team tried to spin it as a healthy debate, the internet had already chosen sides. Ben Shapiro had walked into Jimmy Kimmel Live and walked out owning the conversation. The next morning, Hollywood woke up buzzing. Clips from Jimmy Kimmel Live flooded every feed, replayed from every possible angle. Some edited the moment with dramatic background music. Others froze on Kimmel's expression, that half-second of silence when he couldn't answer. It was the kind of pause that could end a career, or redefine one. Headlines spread like wildfire. Ben Shapiro confronts Kimmel live on air. Late-night laughs turn into moral meltdown. Every outlet had its version. Every influencer had a take. On Twitter, debates exploded. Some defended Kimmel, saying comedy shouldn't be policed. Others applauded Shapiro for finally saying what needed to be said. By noon, your Kimmel Visa Shapiro was trending #1 in the U.S. Inside the ABC building, the energy was chaos. Producers, PR reps, and executives crowded into meeting rooms, scrolling through their phones, whispering damage control strategies. One publicist muttered, "We can spin this. Say it was a healthy exchange." Another shook her head. "No one's buying that." He looked cornered. Kimmel wasn't in that meeting. He was in his dressing room, staring at the muted TV where his own face played on repeat. The clip had been trimmed and slowed down by every news outlet, his hesitation dissected like a crime scene. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion sinking in. For years, he'd been the voice people trusted for late-night comfort, the sarcastic storyteller who could poke fun at anything and still seem human. But now, for the first time, he felt like he was the punchline. The door cracked open. His longtime producer, Doug, peeked in. "Jimmy, you good?" Kimmel forced a laugh. "Do I look good?" Doug hesitated. "Honestly, you look like a guy who just got hit by the internet." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, sighing. "You think I went too far?" Doug didn't answer right away. He walked in, lowered his voice. "I think people are raw right now. You said what you always say, but maybe it landed different this time." Kimmel looked up at him. "And Shapiro, he knew exactly how to twist it. You saw what he did. He played the audience like a violin." Doug nodded. "That's what he does. But you took the bait, man. That's what people are replaying. Not his line, your reaction." Kimmel rubbed his temples, the weight settling deeper. "I just wanted to talk it out, not get moralized on my own damn show." Doug gave a small shrug. "Welcome to 2025. Everyone's recording. Everyone's waiting for a moment. You gave them one." Across town, Ben Shapiro was recording his podcast. Calm, precise, and confident. "The clip speaks for itself," he told his listeners. This wasn't about canceling anyone. It was about accountability. You can't hide behind humor forever. Within hours, millions tuned in to his episode. The timing was perfect, the narrative airtight, and for the first time, Kimmel wasn't the storyteller. He was the subject of someone else's story. By afternoon, other celebrities began weighing in. Comedians defended him. "If we start censoring jokes, we're done," one tweeted. Activists fired back. "This isn't censorship, it's empathy." Even late-night hosts who usually stayed silent on each other's scandals chimed in. Some subtly, others with clear shade. On The Tonight Show, Jimmy Fallon joked, "Man, I love a good debate, especially when it's not me in it." The audience laughed, but the line hit a little too close. Meanwhile, ratings for Kimmel's show surged. The controversy had done what every producer secretly dreams of. It made people tune in. But fame built on friction always costs something. That night, Kimmel walked back into the studio. The audience clapped, but the applause sounded different now. Curious, cautious, like everyone was watching to see if he'd address the elephant in the room. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "So how's everyone doing? Good week?" A few chuckles, mostly polite. "Mine's been interesting," he added. The crowd laughed harder, relieved he brought it up. He continued, walking a careful line. "You know, I've been in this business a long time. You tell a joke, people laugh. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they write a 6-page think piece about it." The audience laughed again, a little louder this time. He paused. "Look, I don't get everything right, but I do believe in what comedy does. It takes the heavy stuff and makes it bearable. If we stop doing that, we stop learning how to deal with it." It was an attempt to reclaim control, to sound reflective without admitting fault. But online, reaction was split again. Some called it classy. Others said it was damage control disguised as authenticity. Backstage, the crew could feel it. The shift. Kimmel wasn't the same. The confidence that once filled every moment was now cautious, calculated. He watched his own words like they were landmines. 2 days later, a tabloid headline hit, "Kimmel under pressure. Network execs consider break." That wasn't true, yet. But perception has a way of shaping reality. Suddenly, everyone was whispering about it. Would the show survive the fallout? Would the advertisers? Meanwhile, Ben Shapiro's interview requests skyrocketed. News networks wanted his take. Podcasts invited him to deconstruct the debate. And while he insisted it wasn't personal, every appearance added a little more fuel to the fire. At one point, during an interview, a reporter asked Shapiro, "Do you think Jimmy owes an apology?" He paused, thinking carefully. "I don't want an apology. I just want people to realize that jokes have weight. When you make light of tragedy, you make light of people's pain. And if you can't handle being called out on that, maybe you're in the wrong business. That line went viral. Again. By the end of the week, the media cycle had turned Kimmel into two different people, the villain of outrage culture and the victim of it. The truth was buried somewhere in between, but no one cared anymore. At home, Jimmy sat on his couch, scrolling through comments. He tried not to, but curiosity always won. Every insult stung a little, every defense felt hollow. He shut off his phone and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, he wondered if the laughter was still worth it. The phone buzzed again. A text from Doug. "We're good for next week? Network says we might want to cool it for a bit." Kimmel didn't answer right away. He stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Yeah, let's talk tomorrow." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. Outside, the city pulsed. The same world he'd spent his career entertaining. But now, for the first time, it felt like the spotlight had turned into a microscope. And somewhere out there, the internet was still replaying that one silent second. The pause that started it all. Days passed, but the noise never stopped. Every hour brought a new clip, a new opinion, another spark to keep the fire alive. Some said it was the end of Jimmy Kimmel's reign as the voice of late-night America. Others said it was his crucible, the kind of storm every entertainer faces sooner or later. But for Kimmel, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was what he saw when the cameras weren't rolling, the silence of his team, the unease of the people who used to laugh the loudest. Every joke now felt like a risk. Every word, a weapon waiting to backfire. He'd started avoiding social media altogether. Too many reminders. Too many strangers telling him who he was, or who he'd become. But one night, curiosity got the best of him again. He opened his phone, scrolled for a few seconds, and froze on a post that stopped him cold. It was a clip, not of him, but of a family talking about the tragedy his joke had referenced. They weren't angry, just hurt. The mother's voice cracked when she said, "We used to watch his show every night." Not anymore. That was the first time Jimmy Kimmel felt the joke hit back. The next morning, he called Doug into his office. "I'm doing something different tonight," he said. Doug looked wary. "Different how?" Kimmel didn't answer right away. He stared out the window, the city stretching endlessly below. "No cue cards, no monologue. Just me talking." Doug sighed. "Jimmy, the network—" "I don't care what the network says," Kimmel interrupted. "This isn't about ratings. It's about respect." That night, the studio was packed. Word had leaked that Kimmel was going to address the moment, and every seat was filled. The energy was strange, expectant, but uncertain. The band played, the audience applauded, but when the music faded, Kimmel didn't start with a joke. He stood there, hands in his pockets, and for once, he looked small under the lights. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened last week," he began. His voice was steady, but softer than usual. "I've made a career out of making people laugh, sometimes at things we probably shouldn't. Most nights, we get away with it, but sometimes we don't." The crowd was completely silent. "I said something that hurt people," he continued. "It wasn't meant to, but intent doesn't erase impact." He paused, searching for words. "When Ben Shapiro sat here and asked me that question about how I'd feel if the joke was about someone I loved, I brushed it off. Because that's what I do. I laugh, I move on. But maybe I shouldn't have this time." He took a deep breath. "So I want to say this. I'm sorry. Not the PR kind of sorry. Not the if anyone was offended kind. Just sorry." Somewhere in the audience, someone started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the whole studio joined in. But it wasn't wild applause. It was quiet, respectful, almost tender. Kimmel nodded, blinking fast. "I don't know if that fixes anything," he said softly, "but I hope it's a start." The show ended early that night. No guests, no band outro. Just Kimmel walking off stage as the credits rolled in silence. Backstage, Doug was waiting. "You did good," he said. Kimmel managed a tired smile. "You think so?" "Yeah," Doug said. "You sounded human again." For a moment, they just stood there. The chaos, the backlash, the endless noise, all of it felt distant now, like a storm that had finally passed. But across town, Ben Shapiro was already recording his reaction. "I appreciate the apology," he said on his podcast that night. "It takes guts to admit when you're wrong. That's rare in Hollywood. Maybe now we can actually have real conversations again. Not just shouting matches disguised as entertainment. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't victory. Just acknowledgement. And that, somehow, mattered more than any viral clip ever could." In the following days, the tone online began to shift. Some people mocked the apology, calling it performative. Others praised it, saying it was the most honest moment Kimmel had ever shown on camera. But something undeniable happened. The anger started to fade. The internet moved on, as it always does. Kimmel's next few shows were quieter, more thoughtful. The jokes still came, but the edge was softer, the empathy sharper. He hadn't lost his humor. Just found its heart again. One night, weeks later, as he wrapped up a taping, Kimmel caught sight of something unexpected in the audience. A small group held up a sign that read, "We forgive you." He smiled, genuine this time. "That's good," he said into the mic, "because I'm still learning to forgive myself." The crowd applauded, and for the first time since the confrontation, it sounded real, not like obligation, but connection. Later, backstage, as the crew packed up, Doug came over. "You realize this whole thing's gonna be a documentary one day, right?" Kimmel chuckled. "Yeah, probably called The Joke That Almost Broke Me." Doug grinned. "Or The One That Saved You?" Kimmel thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Maybe both." He turned off the desk lamp, the room falling into a calm dimness. The chaos, the noise, the endless opinions, they'd all fade eventually. But what would stay was the lesson. That words carry weight. Laughter can cut both ways, and humility sometimes says more than any punchline ever could. He looked at the stage one last time before heading out. The same desk, the same lights, the same city waiting outside. But everything felt new again. Not easier, not lighter, just honest. And as he walked out into the cool night air, Jimmy Kimmel did what he'd always done best. He smiled. But this time, it wasn't for the camera. It was for himself.